Some buildings breathe. You can hear it when the wind passes through the cracked bricks or when the lights flicker in dead silence. Some buildings don't want to let you leave, but only one hides something that was never meant to be found. Beneath the heart of an abandoned high-rise in the forgotten side of Greyhollow City lies an elevator rusted, humming with unnatural energy. Residents claim it moves on its own. No power, no wires, yet the doors open and close, and sometimes, just sometimes, a whisper comes from inside. But here's the thing, there's a button in that elevator, a button that was never installed. What happens when someone presses it? Who built the elevator? What lies at the bottom of a shaft that doesn't exist on any blueprint? And most importantly, why does the elevator keep coming back, generation after generation, dragging people into its cursed mystery? Get ready. What you're about to read is a 7-generation descent into madness, horror, and secrets buried in metal and shadow. This is an elevator with a button that was never installed. Now tell me, if you were trapped inside an elevator that offered you one extra button that shouldn't be there, would you press it? Let me know your answer in the comments. I'm watching closely. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your horror-loving friends. The descent begins now, and trust me, you'll want them with you. Greyhollow City, 1976. The rain lashed violently against the cracked windows of the Astura building, an 11-story structure that had long outlived its purpose. Most of its office spaces were vacant, the wallpaper peeling like old scabs, and the smell of mildew seeped into the lungs of anyone foolish enough to linger too long. No one remembered when the last tenant left, but somehow, every month, the power still worked, and the elevator still ran. Marcus Vell, 28, a structural engineer and urban explorer, had always been drawn to places like this, buildings with forgotten history and unexplained energy. He wore a battered leather jacket, carried a satchel filled with tools, and had a headlamp strapped around his messy curls. "It's just another abandoned wreck," his girlfriend Lana had warned him that morning. "You're chasing ghosts again." Marcus grinned, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Maybe this time I'll catch one." He stood alone in the Astura's crumbling lobby, dust swirling with every step. The elevator loomed before him, matte steel doors, scratched with time. The panel glowed faintly, numbers from 1, but just below the 11th floor button, there was something else. A button labeled B, not basement, not lower level. Just B, faint, almost hand-etched. No light behind it, no dust on its surface. Marcus frowned. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a flashlight. The hallway behind him groaned. He turned quickly. Nothing. Just the wind. Or so he thought. With a deep breath, Marcus pressed the worn 1 button. The elevator shuddered. The doors screeched open, and he stepped inside. The scent of rust and ozone burned his nostrils. As the doors began to close, he reached out and pressed B. Nothing happened. No light, no sound. The elevator hummed, as if irritated, then began descending, but not like normal. This was fast, faster than any elevator should go. The walls trembled. The overhead light flickered violently. Marcus stumbled and grabbed a side rail. A deep, guttural sound came from below, like a groan of metal bending under ancient pressure. Then impact. The elevator jolted to a stop, sending Marcus to the floor. Silence followed, the kind of silence that rang in the ears. The doors didn't open. Marcus stood slowly, checking for injuries. What the hell? Then he noticed the panel again. All the buttons were gone, except, and now, it was glowing. A faint ding echoed. The doors hissed and parted with an unnatural slowness, revealing darkness. A long, narrow hallway stretched out before him. Walls lined with mirror-like panels. No reflections, just black glass. A low mist hugged the ground. Marcus stepped out. Every instinct screamed to go back. He moved forward, boots echoing softly against tile that looked oddly wet, though no moisture touched his soles. At the end of the hallway was a door slightly ajar, humming with static. He pushed it open. Inside was a circular room, walls covered in newspaper clippings, photos pinned with rusted nails, and notes scrawled in chalk. In the center stood a woman, pale skin, hollow eyes, and her mouth sewn shut with thick, black thread. Marcus gasped and stepped back, reaching for the small utility blade in his bag. The woman raised a trembling hand, pointing to the wall behind her. There, written in red, "The button was never installed. You were never meant to press it." The walls suddenly began to pulse like breathing. The woman screamed from inside her throat, the sound gurgling through the threads. Shadows spilled from the corners of the room, twisting, clawing, dragging her into the darkness. Her body convulsed, bones snapping audibly until she vanished completely. Marcus turned and ran. The hallway was changing longer now, the lights above shattering one by one. He sprinted through the thickening mist, the elevator finally visible like a beacon. Something chased him. He could hear the scraping claws against metal, wet breaths just behind him. He dove into the elevator, slamming the B button. The doors shut just in time, but the panel now showed something else. 1, 2, 3. The elevator was going down again. Farther, much farther. He beat against the panel, pressing every button. Nothing responded. Then slowly, he noticed he wasn't alone. In the corner, barely visible, stood a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old, dressed in 1940s school clothes, holding a stuffed rabbit with missing eyes. She looked up at Marcus. "Why did you press it?" she whispered. I didn't know." Her face contorted, not into fear but rage. "You're one of them now." The elevator shuddered violently, and the doors burst open mid-descent, revealing a warped space that looked more like a meat locker than any floor in a building. Hooks swung from chains. Screams echoed, distant but distinct. Marcus screamed back, trying to close the doors. The girl was gone. The rabbit lay at his feet, its mouth now stitched shut like the woman's. The panel now showed no numbers, only one word: waiting. The Greyhollow City, 1976. The elevator continued its descent, unnaturally slow, like it was waiting for something. Marcus fell, gripped the sides of the walls, the air thick with the stench of decay and rust. His heart was hammering in his chest, each beat sounding louder than the next. He couldn't take his eyes off the cracked floor beneath him. The seams between the panels were growing wider with every second, as though something inside the elevator was forcing them apart. The child was gone. The stuffed rabbit remained, but he could still feel her gaze. As the elevator lurched again, Marcus scrambled to press the B button once more. Maybe it was some kind of mistake. Maybe pressing it again would take him back to where he belonged. Or maybe it would finally let him escape this nightmare. But the panel didn't change. It was still blank, waiting. Sweat trickled down his neck, and his breath came in ragged gasps. He had no idea what was happening or how to stop it. He only knew he was trapped in a space between floors, between times, between worlds. The walls seemed to close in on him, bending and warping, until the elevator seemed less like a machine and more like a living thing, an entity that had been waiting for him. The elevator finally stopped. For a moment, Marcus just stood there, breathless, his hand shaking as it hovered over the door button. What if opening those doors led to something worse? He'd seen the woman, and he'd heard the screams. But there was no choice. The doors opened, whether he liked it or not. A cold wind rushed in from the outside, carrying with it the faint scent of burning wood and something metallic. The hallway beyond was dark, almost oppressively so. The air was thick with moisture, and the shadows seemed to stretch and writhe like living things. A soft clicking sound echoed from somewhere deeper in the corridor. It was a rhythmic noise, like something being dragged slowly across the floor. Marcus stepped out into the darkness, the faint light from the elevator casting long, distorted shadow. His boots crunched against the wet tile as he moved forward, the clicking noise growing louder with each step. He rounded a corner and froze. In front of him stood a man, a tall, thin figure, cloaked in a tattered suit. His face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were hollow, sunken deep into his skull. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stood there, staring at Marcus, with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He took a step back, heart pounding, but the figure didn't react. That's when Marcus noticed the objects in the man's hands, a collection of strange, rusted tools, screwdrivers, pliers, hammers, all caked in dried blood. The tools glinted under the dim light, a grotesque invitation to whatever twisted fate awaited him. "What do you want?" Marcus managed to croak. The man's lips curled into a grin. The skin around his mouth pulled tight, exposing teeth that were far too sharp for any human to possess. "Come with me," the man rasped, his voice like broken glass scraping against stone. Marcus didn't hesitate. He turned and ran, the clicking noise now behind him, growing faster, louder. The pursuit had begun. He didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. But the sounds of the man's footsteps, heavy and slow, echoed in the narrow passage. The walls twisted and groaned as if the building itself was alive, complicit in the horrors unfolding within it. He reached another door, a metal one, covered in layers of dust and grime. Desperation surged through him as he yanked it open and stumbled into what looked like a basement. Only it wasn't a basement at all. It was an enormous cavern, far too large for the confines of the Estura building. The air was thick with dampness and decay, and the walls were lined with rows of cages, some large, some small. Each cage contained something that was barely human, twisted, deformed bodies that writhed and clawed at the bars. Faces peered out with vacant, soulless eyes. Their mouths opened in silent screams. "Help me," one of them croaked. A woman, her body misshapen, her fingers gnarled like twisted roots. Marcus recoiled, stepping back toward the door, but it slammed shut behind him with an audible click. He was trapped. Then the lights flickered on. For a brief, blinding moment, everything was illuminated. Every cage, every creature, every twisted face. And at the far end of the cavern, standing like an altar to whatever dark god had created this place, was another elevator. The doors were open, and as Marcus's gaze moved from the elevator to the walls around him, he saw what had been painted there, the same word that had been on the wall in the room with the woman, waiting. Something moved behind him. The tall figure from earlier was standing in the doorway, his grin wide, eyes never blinking. Marcus didn't hesitate this time. He bolted for the elevator, pushing past the cages, ignoring the cries that filled the air like a chorus of the damned. His hands were slick with sweat as he slammed the elevator doors closed. His chest heaved with panic as he pressed every button he could reach. B1, 10, nothing. The elevator didn't move. He could hear it now, the soft scraping of claws on the floor behind him, the low growl of something hungry. Then the doors opened. The figure stood in the doorway, holding the rusted tools. His grin grew wider, impossibly wide. "No," Marcus whispered. "No, no." The man stepped forward, and the elevator trembled as the lights flickered one last time, and then nothing. Greyhollow City, 1976. When Marcus opened his eyes, he wasn't sure what had happened. He could still feel the tension in his chest, the cold sweat clinging to his back, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and rust. But the elevator was no longer descending. It was still, suspended in some strange, unseen place. His heart raced. The tall man with the rusted tools was gone. The cavernous room was gone. The cages gone. In fact, the only thing left was the elevator itself, creaking softly under his weight. He dared to look at the panel. Nothing. Not a single button was illuminated. For a long moment, Marcus just stood there, taking in the suffocating silence. Every instinct told him to press something, anything, but he resisted. He had no idea what pressing any button would do now, and frankly, he wasn't sure he wanted to know. His fingers hovered just above the panel. He was hyper-aware of his own breath, each inhale sharp and shallow. Then, suddenly, a sound broke the silence. A soft click, then another. The air shifted, growing colder, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. A distorted voice whispered from the walls of the elevator, a low, guttural tone that felt like it was inside his mind. "You shouldn't have pressed it." Marcus spun around, heart pounding. No one was there. The lights flickered again, casting long shadows across the elevator's wall. It wasn't the kind of flickering you'd expect from an old building. This was different. This was deliberate. A new noise, footsteps, echoed softly from the far corner of the elevator. Slow, measured. A quiet clicking sound followed, like the faint tap of nails on metal, the kind of noise you'd expect from a predatory animal. His blood ran cold. Without thinking, he pressed the B button again. Nothing. The door opened instead. For a brief, fleeting moment, Marcus thought he might have been dreaming. No, this had to be a nightmare. The door opened onto something that couldn't possibly exist. What he saw was the hallway again, but not the one he'd seen before. The walls were not made of the same crumbling cracked tiles. These walls were made of something slick, glossy and alive. Black veins pulsed beneath the surface, twisting like vines, moving with an unnatural rhythm. The air felt thick, pressing against his skin, suffocating him with each breath. From the shadows stepped a figure, a woman but not quite. Her features were too perfect, too symmetrical. She wore a black dress that shimmered like oil, and her skin was so pale it almost gleamed under the dim light. Her hair fell in dark waves around her face, but her eyes were hollow, jet black, with no pupils, no whites, just endless darkness. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The door clicked shut behind Marcus before he could even react. He was trapped again. "Who are you?" Marcus choked out, his voice trembling. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she extended her hand. Her fingers were unnaturally long, ending in sharp, pointed nails that gleamed like obsidian. Without a word, she began to move toward him, and Marcus instinctively backed up, pressing his shoulder against the elevator wall. But the space was shrinking. The hallway stretched impossibly long, and the shadows, those crawling, living shadows, seemed to close in with every step she took. The woman's lips parted. A soft, melodic voice, almost hypnotic, echoed in his mind. "You shouldn't have pressed it, but now that you have." The lights flickered again, faster this time, like a strobe, and Marcus felt his vision swing. The woman moved closer, her lips curling into a smile that sent a jolt of cold dread through his veins. Then, as if in response to her presence, the air around them thickened. The elevator began to groan, its cables stretching and twisting. The walls pulsed with something dark, alive, malevolent. "Now you'll see," she whispered, her voice soft and sweet, yet filled with something venomous. With a sudden violent shake, the elevator plunged down faster than it ever had before. Marcus's stomach lurched as the world blurred around him. The woman reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek, sending a cold, crawling sensation through his skin. The elevator descended faster, faster than fast, the numbers on the panel flashing erratically. It was as though the very fabric of time and space was warping. The floor beneath Marcus's feet felt like it was shifting. The whole structure groaned, as though it were being torn apart from the inside. Then impact. The elevator slammed to an abrupt halt, throwing Marcus forward. He hit the floor with a sickening thud. The wind knocked out of him. His eyes flickered open. The woman was gone. The shadows, though, had only grown darker, more intense. They crawled along the walls like liquid smoke, enveloping him. The doors of the elevator opened with an eerie, mechanical whine. Marcus staggered to his feet, his head spinning. When he looked outside, the world had changed again. He was no longer in the Estera building. The landscape outside was a twisted, dilapidated version of the world he knew. Broken glass littered the streets, and the buildings were cracked and hollow, their skeletal frames stretching up to a dark sky. No stars, just a swirling gray void above, like a mass of storm clouds. The air tasted foul, sharp, almost metallic. And then he saw them. Shapes, standing motionless in the distance. Figures almost human but with eyes too wide, too hungry. Their mouths opened and closed in a mechanical rhythm, repeating a single unearthly phrase over and over again. Waiting, waiting, waiting. Marcus froze. It had led him here, and now there was no escape. He turned back to the elevator, but it had already closed. Greyhollow City, 1976. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as he stood there staring out at the twisted landscape. The figures in the distance, their wide, empty eyes and hollow mouths, moved closer with an unhurried, methodical pace, as though they already knew his every move. Their slow, deliberate gait sent a chill running down his spine. Each of them was wearing tattered clothing, the fabric hanging from their bodies like remnants of a life long gone. Waiting, waiting. The chant echoed through the air, hollow and distant as if it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The words seemed to reverberate in Marcus's mind, twisting his thoughts. He stumbled backward toward the elevator, the taste of fear sharp on his tongue. His hand reached for the door panel, but just before he could touch it, he stopped. A figure appeared before him, a man tall, with a face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. He wore a long, dusty coat, its fabric fraying at the edges. The man's eyes, obscured by the shadow of his hat, glowed faintly with an unnatural light. As he stepped closer, Marcus could feel the temperature drop around him, the air turning thick and suffocating. The man didn't speak at first, but there was something about him, a weight in the air that made Marcus's skin crawl. His presence alone seemed to distort the very atmosphere. Finally the man spoke, his voice like a whisper carried on the wind. "You pressed it, now you belong to it." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He couldn't find his voice. All he could do was stare at the man, his thoughts swirling like a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The man took a step forward, his footsteps barely making a sound. With each step, the ground seemed to tremble, as if the earth itself was shifting beneath him. "There's no escape." The man's voice dropped to a low growl, his words slow and deliberate. "The elevator knows you. It's been waiting." Marcus's eyes darted to the elevator doors, which were still closed, but he knew there was no point in trying to escape. He had already pressed the button. The elevator had taken him to this place, this twisted version of reality, and it was only a matter of time before he would be dragged deeper. Suddenly the sky above him began to change. The swirling gray clouds parted, revealing a glowing red light at the center. It wasn't the sun, it wasn't even a star. It was something far worse. The light pulsed, casting a sickly glow over the landscape. It felt like it was alive, watching him, waiting. The figures around him, those hollow-eyed creatures, stopped moving. They all turned their heads toward the light, as if in response to some unspoken command. Their mouths opened wider, and the chant grew louder. "Waiting, waiting, waiting." The man in the hat turned his head, his glowing eyes fixed on Marcus. He reached out, his hand cold as ice, and placed it on Marcus's shoulder. The touch felt like it was burning through his skin. "You're here now," the man whispered, "and you'll never leave, not until it's ready for you." Marcus flinched, but before he could react, the ground beneath him began to shake violently. The elevator doors creaked and groaned, as if something deep within was pushing against them, struggling to break free. The world around him twisted, the sky flickering in and out of focus. "It's waiting for you." The voice was no longer just the man's. It was everyone's. The figures that had once moved slowly now swarmed toward Marcus, their mouths opening wide as they uttered those same three words, over and over again. "Waiting, waiting, waiting." He turned away, running blindly through the desolate landscape. His feet slipped in the loose gravel, his heart pounding in his chest. Every step felt heavier, like the air itself was pressing down on him, trying to drag him back into the darkness. The distant red light pulsed again, brighter this time. The sound of the chanting grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was vibrating in his skull. And then another figure appeared. This one was different. This one wasn't like the others. It was a child standing at the edge of the path. A little girl, no older than 6, her face hidden beneath a hood. She stood perfectly still, her tiny hands clasped together in front of her, as if waiting. "Help me," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible over the chant. "Please help." Marcus froze, his breath catching in his throat. He approached the girl slowly, his mind racing. Was she one of them? Was she another trap? As he drew closer, the girl's head tilted upward, revealing her face. Her eyes were pure black, no pupils, no whites, just endless voids of darkness. She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was a cold, empty grin that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. "You should have listened," she said softly. "Now it's too late." Before Marcus could react, the girl's smile widened impossibly, her mouth stretching far beyond what should have been possible. Her voice changed, becoming deep and guttural, as if it was no longer her speaking. "It's waiting for you." Marcus stumbled backward, but the world around him was collapsing. The sky above him flickered violently, the red light growing brighter, swallowing the world in its glow. The girl vanished into the shadows, and the figures returned, their chant now a deafening roar. Their hollow eyes locked onto Marcus, their mouths opening wider, their skin stretching like rubber. Waiting, waiting, waiting. He turned and ran, but the elevator was no longer there. The ground beneath him gave way, and he fell, plummeting into darkness. Greyhollow City, 1976. Marcus fell through the darkness for what seemed like an eternity. His body weightless, spinning through the void, his mind raced with fragmented thoughts, memories, and the disembodied voices of the creatures that had once surrounded him. The air was freezing, colder than anything he had ever felt. His skin prickled with the sensation of being pulled apart, like the fabric of reality itself was tearing around him. Then, with a violent jolt, Marcus landed, hard. He gasped for air, the ground beneath him cold and unyielding. The impact was so sudden, so jarring, that for a moment he couldn't tell if he was still alive or if the fall had sent him into another realm altogether. When his senses returned, he slowly pushed himself up, wincing as pain shot through his limbs. He was no longer in the twisted landscape or the elevator. The world around him had shifted again, and this time it felt more real, more like the world he had once known, but wrong, distorted. He was in a hospital. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, and the hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The walls were cracked, and the linoleum floor was stained with something dark. A thin layer of dust had settled over everything, as though it hadn't been touched in years. But there was something more unsettling than just the decay. Something alive. Marcus stood up, unsteady on his feet. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the empty hospital beds, the abandoned gurneys, and the walls lined with charts and documents. The place was eerily silent, except for the soft, rhythmic ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance. He moved cautiously, his heart still pounding in his chest, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. The doors at the end of the hallway were slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible beyond. The waiting. Marcus remembered the words. Waiting, waiting, waiting. He had thought they were just part of the nightmare, but now in this place, they felt real. The air was thick with anticipation, as though whatever had been waiting for him was now ready to collect. He took a step forward, then another. His shoes scraped against the cracked floor, the sound almost deafening in the silence. As he passed the first bed, his eyes flickered to the figure lying on it. It was a man, his face pale and twisted in pain. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, but the man wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. Yet Marcus could feel something in the room, a presence, like the man was still there even if his body wasn't. Marcus turned away, his stomach turning. He couldn't look at the bodies, the strange, still figures that filled the hospital. He had to keep moving. The hallway stretched on, but the darkness grew thicker the farther he walked. The walls seemed to close in on him, the flickering lights casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. As he reached the end of the hall, he felt an unnatural pull toward the open door. Without thinking, Marcus stepped through. Inside, the room was a mess. Papers were strewn across the floor. Medical equipment lay abandoned, and the windows were covered with grime. But there was something on the far side of the room that made Marcus freeze in place. An elevator. It wasn't like the one he had been trapped in before. This one was pristine, gleaming under the dim light. The doors were wide open, as though it had been waiting for him to step inside. But before he could move, he heard it again. A whisper, soft, familiar, unholy. You shouldn't have come here, Marcus. The voice was different this time. It wasn't the man in the hat, or the child with the black eyes. It wasn't one of the figures chanting in the streets. It was something else entirely. The voice felt as if it was in his head, curling around his thoughts like tendrils of smoke, suffocating him with its presence. You're already too late. Marcus turned sharply, his breath catching in his throat. A figure stood just outside the room, partially obscured in shadow. The voice had come from that figure, but when it stepped into the light, Marcus's heart stopped. It was her, the woman, the same woman from before. The one with the eyes of endless darkness and the black dress that shimmered like oil. Her smile, cold and empty, stretched across her face as she took a slow step toward him. "You pressed it," she said softly, her voice lilting, almost melodic. "And now you are part of it." Marcus tried to speak, but no words came. His throat was tight, constricted. He couldn't move, couldn't think. The woman's presence filled the room, the walls closing in on him like the belly of some monstrous beast. Her eyes gleamed as she stepped closer, her form blurring as she moved with unnatural speed. She was suddenly right in front of him, her cold breath mingling with his. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. "The weight of waiting, the weight of time, of eternity." The world around Marcus seemed to warp. The edges of the room twisted, bending into impossible shape. The elevator behind him rattled violently, the metal groaning as if it were alive. And through the cracks in the walls, something dark and massive moved, something that had been hidden, waiting. "Time has no meaning here," the woman continued, her voice now rising, an eerie, insistent hum. "You are lost, Marcus, just like the rest, forever waiting, forever lost." He felt a chill crawl up his spine as the room began to tremble. The shadows that had once been harmless seemed to shift, twisting and slithering like serpents, closing in on him. His feet felt rooted to the spot, his legs unable to move. But then, the elevator doors closed, the woman's voice disappeared, and for a split second, everything was silent. The only sound left was the soft, rhythmic ding of the elevator as it began its descent. And Marcus, for the first time in what felt like hours, felt himself being pulled back into the grip of the elevator. His mind hazy, his body numb. He wasn't sure if he had a choice anymore. Greyhollow City, 1976. Marcus sat on the cold metal floor of the elevator, his body stiff and aching from the unknown hours or maybe days he had spent trapped inside it. The walls felt closer now, as if they were pressing in on him, narrowing his world until there was only the dull hum of the elevator's machinery and the oppressive weight of the silence. There were no buttons, no numbers flashing, no sound of a voice or a figure waiting to speak, just the slow, deliberate motion of the elevator, descending into the unknown. He didn't remember how long it had been since the woman had left him, or was it that she had never really been there at all? His thoughts were slippery, like water running through his fingers. Time felt like a fog, thick and impenetrable, and the more he tried to grab hold of it, the more it slipped away. The lights flickered again, casting the elevator in brief flashes of bright, sickly light. Each flicker seemed to tear at his sanity, dragging his thoughts deeper into confusion. His mind kept replaying the same twisted images, the woman, her hollow black eyes, the figures chanting, the broken, decaying hospital, and the incessant, relentless waiting. He shook his head, trying to clear it, but there was no escaping it. Waiting. The word repeated in his head like a drumbeat, growing louder with each passing moment. His breathing quickened. He could feel it now, a presence in the elevator with him, something that wasn't there before, something alive. A soft sound, barely perceptible, reached his ears, a scratching. It came from the corner of the elevator, behind the panel. He turned, his heart thudding in his chest. There was something there. The scratching grew louder, closer. Marcus's hand trembled as he reached out, unable to stop himself. It was like the world around him had drawn a breath in, held it, waiting for something. His fingers hovered above the panel, the cold metal of the walls biting into his skin. But then, just as he was about to touch it, the elevator lurched. The sensation of falling hit him with a sickening force. The metal walls groaned, and the floor tilted beneath him. He grabbed hold of the railing for balance. As the elevator dropped, the lights flickering wildly in time with the violent descent. With each passing second, the elevator felt less and less like something that belonged in the world Marcus knew. It had become a thing of its own, a living, breathing entity, its own dark will guiding it. He could feel it now, as though the elevator had some kind of intelligence, as if it were aware of his every movement, his every breath. It knew him, and that knowledge made his skin crawl. He tried to stand up, but his knees buckled under him. The walls were pulsing. The air felt thick with the scent of rust, And Marcus realized that he could hear something else now, something beyond the scratching sound, a whisper. It was coming from all around him, echoing through the walls, the floor, the very air he breathed. Waiting, waiting, waiting. It wasn't the same chant he'd heard before. It was deeper, distorted, layered with 1,000 voices, each one overlapping the next, like an endless crowd of souls crying out in unison. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the sound. He couldn't take it anymore. The elevator jerked again, and this time the descent didn't stop. The lights flickered once more before plunging into complete darkness. The air was damp and oppressive, thick with the smell of decay. His breath came in shallow gasps. As he stood, feeling his way through the pitch-black void, the whispering continued. It was everywhere, waiting. He swallowed hard, trying to calm himself, but the suffocating darkness pressed down on him. His fingers brushed against something cold, slick metal, perhaps. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. The elevator wasn't descending anymore. It had stopped. A tremor ran through his body as the lights flickered back on, but what he saw when they did was something he could never have imagined. The walls were gone. Instead of the cold metal interior of the elevator, he was surrounded by a vast, cavernous space, an open, empty void stretching out in every direction. There were no boundaries, no walls, no floor, and no ceiling. Only the dim, flickering light of the elevator panel, casting a pale, ghostly glow around him. He stepped forward, his feet floating above the ground, disoriented by the sense of weightlessness. He reached out, his hand grazing the nothingness, feeling as though his mind was unraveling with every passing second. The space was infinite, unending. His every movement felt slow, deliberate, like he was trapped in a dream where nothing made sense. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. It was as though he had stepped out of time itself, entering a dimension that existed outside the normal laws of reality. The elevator was still with him, somehow, anchored to this nothingness. He could feel its presence in the very air. But as he stared at the empty void, he began to notice something else. Shapes in the distance, figures moving toward him. They were distant at first, but as they got closer, Marcus's breath caught in his throat. It was the figures, the ones from the twisted version of Greyhollow City, the ones with the hollow eyes, and the mouths that opened too wide. Their limbs were elongated, distorted, moving in ways that weren't possible for a human body. Their faces twisted into grotesque smiles, their eyes unblinking, locked onto Marcus with an intensity that made his skin crawl. They were approaching him, slow, deliberate steps, and all the while, their chant filled the air. Waiting, waiting, waiting. The words felt heavier now, like the sound itself was pulling at the very fabric of the space around him. The figures came closer, closer, until Marcus felt the heat of their presence, and then the elevator doors opened.